This year, I want to beat the S&P 500 just like I did last year, and we're going to see how well I did last year. It's predicted around 90% of professional investors don't beat the S&P 500, so beating the S&P 500 would be a great achievement again to do that 2 years in a row. So I'm going to look at a couple of big stocks this week: Nvidia, Google, Coinbase, and the one I invested in last week, which was Palantir. So that's a big spoiler. You may have seen last week that I was umming whether I was going to invest in Palantir or not, but I did. And I'm going to show you how well that investment has done. So far, it's currently way up from the initial investment just over a week ago. So let's get in. So this is my total investment portfolio with Trading 212. And this is a UK-based investment. So I have the Stocks and Savers ISA, which you can also use as part of the 20k limit each year for an individual. So you could benefit from a tax-free ISA for 1 year if you add up to 20,000 a year. So the total amount I've added to this account was actually 16,836, but the returns I've had last year and a couple of months before that just totals up to 20,346 at the minute. But yeah, I want to add in a couple more stocks. So I'm going to do this video. I'm going to look at 3 different stocks using Fintrix and also TradingView just to see how well I did last year. So I'll take you into Palantir. So this is my current investment that I have in my portfolio, and this is my only one at the moment. So I was all cash. So my investment was at 135.79. That was the price I got in at, and now it's at 154.29, and that's just over a week or so later. So the 28th of February, I think, was when I bought the investment, and we're already up by 14.6%, which is great. But now I want to add another investment into my portfolio because I'm nearly 18,000 in cash. So my portfolio is definitely risk on at the minute, but I want to get more risk off, especially as I think we may be turning tides with a couple of things in the markets. I want to add one more stock this week, and it's either going to be Nvidia, Coinbase, or Google. So hold on to the end of the video to see how I analyze it and which one I choose. And I'm going to make that investment after this video. So you'll see how I get on and whether it's going to be paying off or not investing in this time in the market. So I'm going to start with Nvidia and have a look at the overall scores that I get from Fintrix. So Fintrix, if you didn't see my video last week, it collates a lot of financial metrics that you'll see in a company report and gives each metric a score out of 10. And the scores out of 10 are based on historic numbers from that sector for any given stock. So what this website does, it summarizes all them scores into a single score that you can track over the last couple of years to see how whether it's increasing or decreasing. So it's a good measure of whether the overall financial progression of a company is increasing or decreasing. So I'll show you what that looks like at the minute. For Nvidia, we've got a company score of 7.3, which is relatively strong. It's above average. So the average score for any company on Fintrix is around 6. So being above average is always good. And it's very difficult to get to a 10 because every metric would need to be a 10. And the Fintrix overall score gives you a measure of how well both the company and the macroeconomic environment is performing at the moment at the same time. So you get a good sense of whether it's a good time to invest or not. So if this score for macro is a really low score, you may want to consider to not invest at the current time or start to look to sell off some of your stocks. And that's how I use it too. But 6.5 isn't too bad of a score at the moment, so I'm happy to put some more money into my stocks. So looking at this, Nvidia's got a 7, which is, as I said, it's not a bad score. And if we look on how the score is progressing over time, we can see that it's been increasing, which is good. So I generally like to invest in stocks that have been increasing. But I also want to compare this to the price that we're trading at the moment and look at the chart. So if we switch over to the Nvidia charts, so I'm a trendline trader, so I like to invest on trends and keeping the price in mind and the current trends that we're looking at. It isn't really anywhere near this trend here, which is quite a long-term trend line. It doesn't really represent good value for money. I like to invest nearer to the trend line because I'm expecting a bounce there, especially if the price has been decreasing for a while. But I don't see good value from this when I take into consideration this static line here of the performance from Nvidia. So although Nvidia is performing really well, the value isn't quite there for me And I'm sure Nvidia is going to increase price over time, as you'd expect they would, being such a big company and taking up a lot of the market share. It just doesn't represent value for me. And I'm a value investor, so I look to get in at good prices. We have a good stock that's performing really well. So we'll take a look at Google to see if they're any better. So this is Google, and Google gets a score of 7.6, which is a great score, better than Nvidia, but it doesn't mean it's a better investment. And this sector here, communications, 6.5 is slightly better as well than the technology sector at the moment. So it's potentially a good company to invest in, but we'll just look into the detail of the scores here. So we've got the company score again, which is constantly increasing really over time. If you draw a line through this, it's a constant uptrend, which is great from a Fintrix perspective if I want to look to invest in Google. But I just want to look at then the charts just to see if there's any trend lines that we're getting close to. And it's quite a steep, sharp drive up from this lower price at 138 not so long ago, just over a year ago. And we made almost 100% increase, or probably more than that now, in terms of the return for an investment. And we've got this long-term trend here, which is around the 200 price now, and we're nowhere near that. And we've got this really average trend line here, which is not that strong, and that's closer to the 250 mark. And because we've made such a steep increase in price over the last year, the investment, although it's not a bad investment, the price just seems quite high for me to get good value out of it. So I'm not going to make my investment into Google. So that just leaves one more, which is Coinbase. So let's look at Coinbase. So this is Coinbase, and this is in the financial sector, and it gets a score of 8, which is great. This is better than both Nvidia and Google. And the sector as well has got a score of 6.9. It's just had a bump into the score from last month's values that we've had from the different macroeconomic scores that we collate. So as a quick glance, it already is not a bad signal for an investment. And if this here, the Fintrix overall score calculates the macro and the Fintrix overall score together and collates them, which is already a good sign. If we just want to look at the company score, we can see that it's making massive strides here to increase. This is over the past 2 years too. So over the past 2 years, we've seen a massive increase in the scores from Fintechs. And this is the Coinbase chart. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of the trend line and hitting close to the trend lines. This is where I'd normally like to invest. And we've had a big bounce here. One of the things with Coinbase is that it's quite closely correlated to the prices of the cryptocurrency. So you've had that big dip in crypto market from here. This is probably the Bitcoin's lowest, and it quite correlates to the recent prices in Bitcoin here. But it's still not a bad price to get at. And we've got this massive demand zone, which is where we've seen reactions in prices. So it's also just had a bounce from that. And if I did this video a week or two ago, we probably would have had a better, investment to jump in at this point. But I don't mind being 5 to 10% out from an investment perspective to jump into the market. If I've just missed the best possible price, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that it's a bad price to invest in it. But based on this, it's probably a good investment that I want to jump in at. So if the market and the Bitcoin prices do fall again for the cryptocurrency as a whole, then it is likely to come down to this 150 mark. But I see a massive upside too. So I think last year it was announced that it was joining the S&P 500. I think it did. And we're likely to see another increase as well. So I'm going to put another investment of this into my portfolio. And just like cryptocurrency, because this is quite correlated to Bitcoin, it is a high risk investment, but I do see some massive potential for this in terms of returns, and it's something that I like to add to my portfolio. So after this video, I'm going to make my purchase for Coinbase, and we'll have our first or second investment into our portfolio. So I'm likely to add around 2,000 UK pounds for Coinbase. So that makes up 4,000 of my portfolio, which is still quite low. But I see a good potential return for Coinbase. Even if it does drop 5 to 10%, I'm happy with the risk on that, bearing in mind that I'm all cash at the moment too. And one thing I want to show you is also how well Fintrix does from a lower scoring investment. So, sorry, Krispy Kreme, this is one that we've had that I spotted the other day, and it gets a Fintrix company score of 2, and also the macroeconomic score is a 5.5 in the consumers staples sector. So we'll look at the trend for this, and as you can see from an overall score perspective, it's scoring down, which is never good over the last 2 years. And also from a company score perspective, it's really dropped off. So we've gone from a 4.5, which is still quite average, to a score of around 2. So I'm going to head over to the trading view for Krispy Kreme, and we can see this being played out on the charts too. So over the last 2 years, we've had quite a significant drop from 20 all the way down to 3.42. So what Fintrix does, it also helps you spot all the bad eggs in your portfolio. So it gives you a chance to understand if there is a slight decline, it might be a chance to look at whether it's worth taking that investment out of your portfolio and whether you should start looking elsewhere in terms of different investments. So this is my update for Bitcoin. We haven't really moved too far in the last week since my last video, but we have made some minor adjustments when you zoom in. I mean, from an overall perspective, we still aren't anywhere near the 80K mark, which would break a trend to go upwards. And we're still not reaching the 60K mark to get a bounce upwards from this side either. So we're still looking to be relatively steady within the market, but I'm just going to zoom in just a bit more so you can see how I would look into the minor charts to get a better view. So this is the 4-hour chart, and it gives us a bit more detail in terms of where some key trends might be. So I'm going to draw a few trend lines here just to get a picture of where we might be heading in the near future. So we've had a couple of bounces here from the resistance, and we seem to be, from this point, sort of building upwards momentum to potentially go higher. So is the bottom in? A lot of people have said that it could be. So I'm just going to pay caution to this line here because this is going to be quite key resistance, and depending on what the market does, we could see it come up to 80K and drop down again. But we're just going to have to see how strong the price remains in the current trends. So I'm going to draw this trend which I had previously that I shared on my X account, and it kind of got broken here a bit. It touched this point and looked like it was heading straight back down, but then it broke upwards and broke out of this resistance line here. And just for comfort's sake, I'm just going to change this to green just because this is a green demand line that I like to add in from a buyer's resistance. But we've had quite a lot of sellers resistance, and then it broke out and it broke back into this. And I thought we may see some more resistance here, but it did break out again. So that may mean that this trend line here is now non-existent. And we could have a mini trend line come in here, which a few people might see, and we may also get a response at 72. But if it does break in back into this kind of triangle, if you'd like, then we could see a price go down and test this line. So we'll see how the market goes at the minute. I'd like to just wait a bit longer to see how this plays out. After we broke out, I was expecting to see a higher price on Bitcoin, so I was expecting to see an 80. But if we break back in again, we could be another couple of days before we see another break. And while this uncertainty is happening in the market across the economy, yeah, anything can happen really with the price of Bitcoin and the other stocks, the other cryptocurrency going with it. So if I was to predict what's happening with Bitcoin now, I'd probably say that we're going to be going back and forth in this new triangle here before we see another breakout, and that will decide where Bitcoin goes. If it does break out here, we're likely to see a big push to come up to 80. But if not, we could be ranging again between the 66 and the 72 mark. So that's what I see in the next week or so. So I use Fintrix because it gives me a really easy view of the world from an investment perspective, and I can contrast that across all stocks in a sector and have a very simple comparison as to what's good and what's not, and what's falling and what's increasing. as to make my investment decisions better than just investing into the S&P 500, which is very strong. It's had very good returns over the number of years it's been available, but I like to take my chance on the market and pick the stocks I want to pick, because I don't want every stock in the S&P 500, because there are some companies that I don't want to invest in. So I beat the market last year. Let's see if we can beat the market this year. You can follow along to see how my portfolio is going at the minute. So this year I'm up already 15% on just my first investment from Palantir as a percentage of my portfolio. So let's see if I can go all the way up to 30% like I did last year, or even beat that, which with Fintrix I think I can. If you like this video and you stay to the end, thanks for watching. Feel free to give me a like, it's greatly appreciated. This is a brand new channel, it's only had one video before, so appreciate any subscribers that want to see how we're tracking and want to keep an eye on how Fintrix is going, so you can use it to discover what scores your stocks get on, and maybe even just remove a couple of the bad ones out of your portfolio that are not going to do that well this year.